and welcome. We'll start in a couple minutes. We still have people strolling in, making their way down here. Klinke geinach dag gil achiuchat duasak. Yes na chatsati. Gana ka getlan gan harayachat. Gunneth Cheesh to the Irish people, Gunneth Cheesh to the Taku people, Gunneth Cheesh to the Tsimshian and the Haida people. You're all my grandfather's people. Gunneth Cheesh to the Tsimshian, the Kwaan. We really appreciate that you're here. You're my father's people. I want to say Gunneth Cheesh to the Kwaan, the Filipino, and the Hawaiian community. You're my in-laws, Gunneth Cheesh. And then finally to the Black community or the African American community. Two of my sons come from your community, and I am so honored that they are part of your community and part of my family. So Gunneth Cheesh. People are still making their way in here. Welcome. For this presentation tonight, just so you understand the seating, Richard, who is presenting this evening, has so much fantastic detail that we're going to do our best to accommodate your experience. So in a few minutes, when Richard gets started, we're going to dim the lights even more so that you can see the detail of his maps and his presentation. We're almost ready. We blocked off the gray seating so that we could get as packed as we could here in the front seating so that you could get the best view. My folks sitting over here before we start, are you able to see the screen? You doing okay? It's good? You can't see the corner? If I move? If we put it down a little? It's the podium. Oh, I don't know if we can slide it over. I mean, I think we can. Let me see. What's that? Well, the group over here, thank you, Cody. So the group over here can't see this part of the, because they're lower than the podium. Any chance we can move the podium a little bit? Oh, okay. Yeah. Can we pull it back a little? Is that better? Is that better? Goodness cheese. Goodness cheese. So I'm noting that this space is filling up, and I'm going to ask my Wu Chin students if they wouldn't mind untaping this goodness cheese, Cody. Yes. Perfect. All right. So I did my introduction. My Tlingit name is Dach Kishach. It comes from the head of the Nass River. I thanked my grandfather's people, and I see some of my grandfather's people in the back, and cheese to the Taku. And my in-laws, my father's people, my children's people. My English name is Colleen James. I run the Native and Rural Student Center, which is located right below the cafeteria in the Morant building. This year's programming, every year, I work with Ronalda to identify what kind of theme am I going to filter my programming through. And just so you folks know, my theme for this year for the Native and Rural Student Center and any of the programs that come out of it, we're referring to this year's theme as resilience in an environment of change. That's such a broad title, and it allows me a lot of flexibility to collaborate with lots of fantastic people, including our presenter this evening. Okay, welcome everyone. So before I invite Wu Chin up to open up our program, I'm going to do just a couple of announcements. Okay. In the event of an emergency, we have an exit straight back. Right over here to my left, it would be your right. straight in the back. For anyone needing access to restrooms, we have a few here. We have some, if you look straight to the wall over here and follow it right about midway, we have restrooms there. And then we also have our gender fluid bathrooms upstairs. For those folks needing a little more support getting around, we do have an elevator here, which I'm sure most of you already discovered, that can help you get up to the second floor. And also, we have Evening at Egan. We have 2 more events this month, and our students are going to come up front and talk to you about that. So without further ado, I would like to invite, I have the honor, in addition to doing programming for our campus, I have the honor of working with our college students. And I do a lot of leadership development with Ronalda Cadiente Brown. She's here in the audience. She is our, not only our PETUS director, but she is also the assistant dean to our new College of Education, and they are doing some fantastic work. In case you didn't know, our campus is collaborating with Sealaska Heritage Institute, and they just recently together received a new PETUS grant, which is Preparing Indigenous Teachers and Administrators for Alaska Schools. So that's Equity in Action. And if you have any questions about how to get scholarships for the PETUS program, you'll want to talk to our lovely Ronalda Cadiente Brown. And anyway, as I was mentioning earlier, we do a lot of excellent programming, and it really has everything to do with our students and their heart and their energy. We've been doing a lot of racial equity work in the community for the last 4 years with First Alaskans. And on that note, I would like to invite our two of our college students who are part of Wucheen, their council members, to come forward, and they will welcome you as well. So Wucheen, Miss Claire Helgeson and Sage Hogan are working their way up here. I am really thankful to see all of your faces. Juneau is just thriving with events, so I'm thankful. Thank you so much for being here, and please come forward.
How Gunnarschich hat je ade Claire Helgeson je het doorzaak leidka keinach katsu Christian je het doorzaak schoon je Irish ka Finnish ayachet Norwegian yade chetiti Seattle ke het uawut Gunnarschich oe Aak'w katsu oe Taku Kwaan ye anikach oe uhan. Hello everyone, my name is Claire Helgeson. In Tlingit class they call me Christian, which means stinky feet. I didn't pick that one. But I said thank you all for coming here. I'm so glad that you're all here to celebrate this Evening at Egan lecture series in Native History Month, November. I'm really glad to see all of your faces, and it makes me feel really good about the community of Juneau that you all came out. So another thing I said was thank you to the Aak'w and Taku people whose land that we're on. I'm really excited to hear this presentation tonight, and I want to let my counterpart Sage introduce himself and remind us of some more events we have coming up for this month. So thank you.
Sage you chut do a sock, yech na aya chut, kiksadi hit dach aya chut, Kwaan yudi aya chut. My name is Sage, guys. Nice to meet everyone, I guess. So we got some events coming up this week, or not this week, but this month. We have 3 more Evening at Egan's. 2 more evenings at the Egan's. And then on the 17th, we have our native traditional games from 12 to 3 at the rec center just down the street. The 14th and the 15th, we're gonna have authors here at the writing center for like people who want to have their stuff worked at. They're authors with tidal waves, I believe. And then we have Form Line Fridays every Friday this month at the NRC Center in the Morant building. 1 to 2.
Lastly, so all those events are happening on Fridays, except for traditional games, except for Turkey Day holiday. So we hope to see you come out. And now I'd like to welcome to the stage our speaker this evening, Richard Carstensen.
Oh, it's not the first slide. Let's see. There. Could we have the lights down a little? Okay. Oh, you're filming? Yeah. All right. Thanks everyone for coming. And Gunastish to Kwaan, who claims the land from Aak'w, Twisted Tree, Eagle River, to Kanaka, Skinny, Seymour Canal. Thanks also to Taku Kwaan, our neighbors to the southeast. And Gunastish to the Raven clans. The Kleenay, who claim Aak'w, Little Lake Bay, and all the land around. Gunastish to the Hluknakari and the Ganakari. Thanks also to the Eagle clans. Woohoo! Opposites to the Kleenay, the Wushkitan, opposites to the Kleenay, and to the Yanyay and the Sitkwe. All these clans have deep roots in this country. I'm honored to be part of the November agenda, but I also understand that I'm an outsider, speaking for no one but myself. If anything I say is mistaken or hurtful, I apologize, and I encourage you to correct me afterward, publicly or privately. My role in educational programs for Goldbelt and Sealaska heritage is mostly to add natural history to their cultural history offerings. Tonight we'll do that, but as Colleen requested, try to keep bringing it back to hints that these stories hold about resilience, lessons to share with our students. I should also be clear about what I don't contribute. At Discovery, we're a pretty white organization. We claim no authority in matters of Tlingit language, customs, oral history, or spirituality. This vest is a gift from Ronalda Cariente from a class we did several years ago. I'm wearing it to honor our connections, UAS, Discovery Southeast, Sealaska, Goldbelt Heritage, but not because I feel empowered to speak for anyone. Gunastish Ronalda. Tonight we'll look briefly at 4 areas where a naturalist can contribute to the story of Taku Ani. These will be hand-waving samplers, but I'll mention online resources and how to access those in a moment. First, a tour through glacial history and the biogeography of Southeast Alaska. Second, some clues from journals of early invaders through Tlingit Ani. Third, a few highlights from the Goldbelt class, Why Do We Live Here? And lastly, as Jared Diamond puts it, how do societies choose to succeed or fail, and what does our environment have to do about that? Geographers love to zoom in and out. We even have a tactile association, the roller on the mouse. To understand the uniqueness of Aak'w Taku Ani, let me get my pointer here. Let's scale out to all 22 biogeographic provinces. They're grouped into 5 color families: the mainland blues, the browns of the northern outer islands, yellow of Juneau province, the greens of the inner provinces, and the pinks of the southern outer provinces. And here's how to learn more about them. At Discovery, we just relaunched our natural and cultural history site, Juneau Nature. From the home page, open this nifty hyperlinked sitemap, and all 100 boxes on here are hyperlinked. Our webmaster told Sean and me not to do this, but we tried it, and so far, I've only heard one report of a missing link. So the provinces, you'd go to places, Tlingit Ani, and here are the 22 provinces. The basic divisions of this website are nature, culture, places, and tools. But where were we? Oh, the biogeography of Tlingit Ani. Here's some trends as we move from southeast to northwest and from outside to inside. Obviously, more glaciers in the northwest, and generally declining diversity in terrestrial species. Exceptions like mammals on the mainland have to do with increasing connectivity through the transboundary rivers. Here's how that looks if we color islands and mainland provinces by number of known mammals. Only 3 species out on Aak'w, Forester Island, and 36 in Taku biogeographic province. Most important mammal in Tlingit Ani, hands down, was Sa, harbor seal. These are 6 genetically defined stocks. Not sure I like that word. Also coded by abundance. To me, this was counterintuitive at first, because I associate seals, seal reproduction at least, with the iceberg country of the north. Actually, though, there's 5 times more seals in the labyrinthian channels of the south than in the long, straight-shot fjords of the north. And if you don't trust aerial surveys, here's from boat surveys of major concentrations. Even though I drew them on a berg, it looks like a seal hunter would be better off in the south. If seal was the most important mammal, gat, sakai, was the most prestigious fish. Greatest escapement is from the famous northern lakes, Chilkat, Alsaic, Copper River country. But watershed people didn't need the abundance that fed the world in cans. Better is sprinkling dozens of small sockeye lakes all over the landscape, so every house can have its own. 2/3 of all of these lakes are in the southern third of Southeast. At the end of our Goldbelt class, Why Do We Live Here?, I felt I'd learned enough about Tlingit Ani to make a wild-ass guess about population concentrations at the peak of the Little Ice Age. This was 100 years before the first census by Veniaminoff, so this is speculative. But a dozen or so factors suggest that in Aak'w Taku Ani and in Hunakawu, humans were few and far between. If you haven't seen Sealaska's new touch table at the Soboleff building, plan on at least a couple hours. 3,500 place names, Gunashishtam, with an elder pronouncing them usually. Published maps are in general agreement, but with small differences in boundaries. Working with Chuck Smythe on this Kwaan's map, with input from Steve Langdon and Tom Thornton, I noticed they're all really picky. Which was awesome for me, because there's nothing more educational than going through 14 drafts. But I should have bid that one by the hour. If you're not sure of the difference between Kwaan and clan, a Kwaan is simply a geographic unit within which are several clans. Clans generally spread across multiple Kwaans. The Kwaan had no decision-making power. That belonged to clans. That changed with the arrival of Europeans who wanted to negotiate with Kwaan leaders. Here's my hypothesis. The Kwaan is a geographically logical unit, the area you can learn well in a lifetime. You can reach the outer limits from the center in a long day's paddle with 10 friends in a sea canoe. So Kwaans were generally pretty stable over time. Clans were more stochastic. Although genetically stable on the female side, they moved every few generations. Spend a few weeks reading or listening to clan migration stories, and you'll probably reach similar conclusions. Zooming in gets complicated. I won't leave this map up long because I don't want to start another war. Biogeographic provinces are safer because, like Kwaans, at least pre-contact Kwaans, they're politically toothless. Here's the difference. In Aak'w and Taku Ani, we have 3 biogeographic provinces, Aak'w, Taku, and Hutsnu'u. Aak'w biogeographic province is 28% covered by glacial ice. That's second only to Lituya province, and even more than Glacier Bay. Aak'w province is rich in estuaries, glacially uplifting estuaries, an incredible gift to watershed-based fisher food producers. But they were much less productive in the Little Ice Age. The heart of Taku province is the transboundary river it's named for. Less well known is that Sitko province, or the Saudan Kwaan, had its own transboundary river. According to Wally Olson's records of Fort Durham, the name was Sitko. I don't think that's spelled properly, but that's now known as the Whiting. It was also a transboundary trading river. It's hard to imagine Aak'w or Taku Kwaan surviving the Little Ice Age without access to Hutsnu'u province. The mainland was an icebox. In 1842, Tlingit hunters from 7 Kwaans sold 3,000 deer to Hudson Bay Company at Fort Durham. Those deer could not have come from the mainland. Let's flip through a time sequence starting with today. Everything on this image is from a remote sensing technology called IFSAR, similar to LiDAR but not quite as high res. IFSAR also gives contours, which is how I generated the changing ice and sea levels you'll see next. The Great Ice Ages peaked about 20,000 years ago. Ice was about 5,000 feet over the mainland, declining to about 4,000 feet over Hutsnu'u. That's why Stroller White on the mainland and Eagle Peak out on Hutsnu'u just barely poked out. Most shorelines were ice-free by about 14,000 years ago, but I've skipped ahead to 10,000, showing the beach about 300 feet higher than today. Deep bays penetrate at Aak'w, Eagle River, and Aak'w Bay. Northern Hutsnu'u is diced into an archipelago of islands. Trunk and cirque glaciers are melting back, and a stagnating glacier squats on Eagle Crest. Most shorelines varied from inside to outside. One complication is the waterbed effect. In the upper cartoon, around 20,000 years ago, crust in our neighborhood was depressed 1,000 feet under a mile thickness of glacial ice, and there was a corresponding bulge out beyond the outer coast where caribou apparently roamed. In the lower profile, the waterbed has sloshed back up, and we have marine sediments hundreds of feet above sea level in the Juneau area, while the caribou shelf is drowned. not behaving. I'll just hit every key on the keyboard and eventually something will happen. Well, yeah, I've been advancing with the left arrow.
Working correctly. Let's see, do we have a mouse? We don't have anything going on at the moment. Oh, here we go. We got some movement now. Interesting.
Yeah, great.
Okay, we're back. I don't know why it
Thank you.
paused there for a moment. Enjoy.
I think a lot about Hill 560, that little bump across Aak'w, Little Lake. If you were a paleo-marine ringed seal hunter paddling quietly 300 feet above Egan Library, where would you go ashore to camp? Perhaps on an island with gull eggs, only occasionally harassed by those ornery white bears? Here's my best take on the view from up bay, from that island up into the glacier. Tasty looking immature gull in the foreground, wormwood tundra that I borrowed in Photoshop from Denali, and the largest tree on the landscape was scrub alder. Not much to carve a canoe from. Glacial historians have several names for the long interval between the Great and Little Ice Age. Most cheerful is thermal optimum. Sea level within a few feet of today's, so I didn't have to do much to this slide except delete some outlying cirque glaciers and shrink some of the valley glaciers back up into the ice field. Because it was warmer and drier, there were forest fires. Climate maybe like today's Pennsylvania. At peak Little Ice Age, just before Euro's elbowed in, sea level is about 11 feet higher than today's around Juneau. So the gorgeous coastal meadows and feathered uplift forests that we take for granted today were non-existent. Storm waves ate into unraveling old growth. Bulbous valley glaciers. Advancing Taku backwatered a lake into Canada. In the next section, we'll zoom in and think about what that meant for the Taku Yanyedi. That was a lot to absorb. Hopefully I'll get this up on Vimeo and you can go through the series at your own pace, but I might not load that clan map. Through alien eyes is a phrase I love from De Laguna. I gave a program for Sealaska's teacher conference several years ago on what could be learned through the eyes of early British invaders through Aak'w. Afterwards, I posted to Vimeo, but Greg Cheney noticed an error in my logic, so I pulled it down, and I hope to get that back soon. Just because these journals are such a magnificent source for understanding Aak'w. So stay tuned to Juneau Nature for that. For this evening, just a few vignettes from that study, partly to show why the British cartographers are such a great source. This is all we had just a few years before Vancouver, a French map that shows Tlingit-Ani as solid coastline, no archipelago. So compare that to Vancouver, and it's a huge advance. What we call the Vancouver Maps, though, are actually by Joseph Baker, a member of the voyage. Rather imaginative when you zoom in, but in combination with the daily logs and full of carefully measured distances and bearings, you can usually figure out exactly where they were each day and who they met. Back in England, Vancouver confiscated almost everyone's journals. George himself never saw Aak'w or Taku Ani. He remained with the big ships on the outer coast while Joseph Whidbey took 3 small rowboats into the archipelago. Those Whidbey journals disappeared. We can only trust that George accurately copied them. Fortunately, ship naturalist Menzies had a powerful patron who stonewalled Vancouver. And 2 centuries later, Wally Olson at UAS tracked down the Menzies journals and published them. I spent several months cross-referencing Menzies with Vancouver and Whidbey line by line. Here's just the highlights. The Whidbey crews rode twice through Aak'w and Taku Ani. First from the north, the red lines, and later from the south, the blue lines. They didn't understand Hootsnoo was an island until closing the traverse in August. On the July trip, they came down from Chilkat country, spooked by an encounter with musket-wielding warriors. On July 18th, they rode south into a gale and probably lunched right around the corner from Anshkaltsu, the village at Aak'w. I say it was the future village because on both July and August visits, they had ample opportunity to observe what became the central village of Kwaan. We know from Philip Joseph's history that two villages preceded this one, at Satahin, behind the Seals Water, Admiralty Cove, and another at today's Fairhaven, just about here. I've described the next incident at length in the slideshow, First Encounter, which will be back up soon. Pursued by several canoes who ignored a warning shot, Whidbey rode for the shore of Hootsnoo. Aak'w paddlers sprinted around him, jumped out, and defended the shore with spears, not muskets, as in Chilkat Ani to the north. Rather than open fire, Whidbey abandoned his plans of southward surveys and fled to Hootsluchu, which Vancouver later named Point Retreat. On the return trip in August, Whidbey poked into Sitka, Gastineau, but was turned back by close-packed bergs, drifted down from Taku. As he continued around Sayek, Douglas Island, Aak'w canoes from two villages began to follow him. I interpret these as Satahin and apparently a lesser-known village inside Horse Island. Annoyed by the pursuit, another warning shot was fired, but as in July, this only caused the paddlers to accelerate. Whidbey's crew then fired at the lead canoe, whose occupants ducked below the gunwales and retreated. Satahin, behind the Seals Creek, was probably Aakwan's central village in 1794, and probably where Whidbey's crew had killed someone the day before. Passing on their way back south, they heard loud lamentations and concluded some, quote, person of consequence had died. Whidbey's orders were to pursue any possibility of a northwest passage. So before returning to the ships at Shihalukna, Cape Amani, his men rode into Taku Kunakei, glacier-bidding bay. Plowing dense bergs and sleet in August, they made 13 miles, which took them probably to Grizzly Bar. Here, Vancouver's secondhand landform description is difficult to understand. Europeans had no words for glacier country this intense. But thanks to Roman Motica, we know how things looked. Today, Taku Kwaan City, Taku People's Glacier, is grounded on its own moraine. At peak Little Ice Age, it dammed the inlet, backwatering the lake I showed earlier. Imagine the Yokulalp when this thing cut loose. Not surprising that Whidbey reported no cultural sites on the push to Grizzly Bar. Stories in both Aak'w and Taku Kwaans confirm this glacial blockade that ended only with human sacrifice. Before leaving our reports from alien eyes, let's jump ahead 75 years. Alaska is suddenly owned by Yankee veterans of the Civil War. They're jangled from slaughter on a scale never seen in the North Pacific, and some are itching for a fight. Richard Meade is not pleasant reading. He destroyed 5 settlements in Skanach, Noisy Beach, named Saginaw after his revenue cutter, and Aak'w, Security Bay, which wasn't so secure when he was done with it. But here's what we know about Aak'w Ani from Meade's maps and journals. This map wasn't published until the early 1880s, but is still based on what Meade saw in March 1869, a month after Cake. He steamed right past Anshkaltsu, the red dot, without comment or a mark on his map. We really need to find this chart 883. At first I wondered if that meant Anshkaltsu still wasn't there, but Jim Garrity assures me it was. A few months earlier, Captain White on the Wyanda anchored off that village, but his otherwise meticulous logs, which Jim has transcribed, say nothing about it. Jim thinks that's because there was an ethnologist aboard, Thomas Miner. He probably took extensive notes, but nobody knows where they are. Someone needs to go bang on the door at the Smithsonian. As for Meade and Saginaw, they anchored off Satehin in what is map called Aak'w Bay. This name change has caused a lot of confusion. Bob DeArmond explained that the name Aak'w Bay didn't move to its current location on the mainland until 1906. Till then, it logically belonged to the more important Kwaan village where Meade pulled up. White flags flew over every clan house. His terrorism at Cake was working. He also mapped and described a Taku settlement at the mouth of that inlet. This map turned up recently in the Sealaska archives. Because it says Aak'w Harbor, it was assumed to be the first map of Anshkaltsu. Interesting, though, that it says Point Young at the top. In the lower left, copied by Lieutenant Commander Merriman, who later destroyed Angoon, from a sketch furnished by Commander Meade. Remember that Meade never saw Anshkaltsu. At Satehin, he reported, quote, 14 houses on Admiralty Island, which matches those 14 lines, interestingly grouped instead of single row. Maybe that's explained by the label blockaded. Chuck Smythe says it was unusual to fortify an entire village. I wonder if they could have thrown it up in the months since learning about Cake. Here's an overlay of Meade's chart onto an Ifsar hillshade. Pretty impressive fit, especially considering he just freehanded it from the deck of Saginaw without instruments. This would place the village right at the base of the spit. Satehin could be for Kwaan as the lost village of Gusaic is for the community of Yakutat. Exploring it together would be pretty unforgettable for our elders and our students. George Vancouver and Richard Meade were not nice people, but both were detail guys, and both loved maps. In the name of decolonization, let's not throw out the baby, the maps, with the bathwater, the arrogance of their prose. Whoa, that's the last slide. Huh. See if I can, I'll probably have to come out to get back to where I was. I think I got it.
Nearby if you need me.
I might. It won't go into presentation mode.
Let's see if we come out. I'm still having that behavior where it pauses. And it isn't taking. There we go. Is that gonna do it for us? Not yet.
Technology always makes me feel really stupid, so when somebody like this can't do it either, I'm a little...
I'm here for you. Is that where we want to be?
That's it.
All right.
Gonna sheesh. In 2013, Goldbelt Heritage Foundation offered a semester class for high school students called Why Do We Live Here? Kate Jensen, now Kate Cruz, was lead instructor and facilitator. My role is pretty informal, but as weeks passed, I began to serve as synthesizer for all the cool ideas and experience that elders and experts brought into our class and field sessions. When I made up the thank you sidebar for the course manual, I realized, whoa, that 30 people and 6 agencies and NGOs had contributed. We're getting a little closer here to Colleen's question about resilience. Not only why do we live here, but how can we keep living here without killing the goose that lays our golden eggs? I began to use this bubble chart by way of review. Periodically, I drew it on the whiteboard to elicit thoughts and recollections from our students. Across the bottom is what humans need as residents of Tlingit Ani. Across the top are elements of environment, each one a discipline with its own specialists. They trend generally from the abiotic to the biotic, but Kate pointed out that that distinction is meaningless in many native traditions. Maybe in one debriefing, a student would remember that raised beaches are the best foundations for clan houses and storage pits. Someone else might note that nagoon berries grow best there. Ideally, it starts to look like this. Think about the Bioneer's signature sign-on on NPR when the speaker says, "It's all connected. It's all intelligent," and the geese are honking in the background. Considering just the CBJ road system, where to live's kind of a no-brainer. Anshkaltsu, this place has everything. Tightest translation I've heard is from David Katsik, Nexus Town. Cecilia Koons told Marie Olson you could call it "pack up your bags and go." Richard Dowenauer independently came to the same translation just by taking the word apart into its components. The going is a to and from dynamic. Published translations like "town they abandoned" and "town that moved" are too unidirectional, according to my teachers. Maybe this is our first resilience lesson. Don't sit too heavily on any one piece of Aak'w Taku Ani. Keep many irons in the fire and let your land lie fallow. As our class progressed, we settled on 5 primary factors in village site selection. For simplicity, we focused on pre-contact conditions, but it was interesting to reflect on how priorities change with technology, with needs, and with delivery systems. All of the village sites I've seen or read about in Aak'w Taku Ani are on raised former tideland. Gradient's mild and digging is easy. Fort sites are a different matter, they're higher. Contours here show gradually increasing rebound, fastest in upper Sititigeyi, bay in place of the glacier. Throughout northern Tlingit Ani, village sites within a few feet of today's high tide line are by definition young, only a few centuries old. Doesn't mean there aren't older ones, but we've only found a few. David gave us a phrase for Raven's way of studying the world, Adah Anachlein. Clay Good figured that to understand how Raven sees the world, we should look over his shoulder. So we went up a tree. If you know the story of the Yaxte hole, those sapsucker holes in his back are interesting. Raven sent his little helper birds, including woodpecker, into the forest for skunk cabbage to wrap a king salmon he'd fooled into coming ashore. While they were off on their errands, Raven ate the whole salmon. On return, the birds found him belching contentedly. There may be a moral here about the relative merits of intelligence and honesty. Adah Anachlein will fill your plate, but it's friends who've got your back. As for resilience, I'd go for smart and honest. You've probably heard that tropical archaeologists are finding ancient Mayan temples completely covered in forest by shooting a gazillion light pulses through the canopy, measuring ricochets to the nearest few inches, and then digitally removing the vegetation. That's LiDAR. Here is Anshkaltsu in June 2013. I need my laser pointer. No trees have started growing for 100 years of no activity here, and there's no spruce forest growing on where the clan houses were. I call that meadow capture. So let's strip away the trees and even this chest-high brush and see what the bare earth looks like. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Of course, we already knew where these house pads were, but I had no idea how well defined. That's probably raised up on midden deposits. As LiDAR gets better and better, even Southeast archaeologists will be using it to scout for really ancient villages, hundreds of feet above today's sea level. Dora Spalding, Kwaan, married Vic of Spalding's Meadows. Their ranch, the Hafner place today, was east of Aak'w Bluff, out there in the middle distance. This gently sloping garden is obviously of marine origin, but too high to be Little Ice Age. In the LiDAR elevation model, it slopes from 50 down to 38 feet. So a minimum of 9,000 years old. But it's still a marvelous storm beach, probably underlain by well-drained gravel. I wonder who lived there before the forest arrived. Was she too a gardener? I won't dwell on this, but I put this up as a reminder. Madonna Moss wants us to give up on the term advanced hunter-gatherers to describe the cultures of the North Pacific and use something more like fisher food producers. This is a pretty good illustration. The second of our site selection factors is good yakudeyi, canoe ramp. Not too steep, not too flat. You can launch a fragile cedar-hulled canoe quickly at any tide. Probably the most important term David Kutsik gave us was gunhin, a spring-fed stream. On the left is Aak'w. Doesn't stink up with salmon in August and runs reliably when other little streams freeze. On the right is a humpy stream at Hilda, good for putting up fish, but suboptimal for drinking and washing. Many little streams that served entire villages are not mapped in the Forest Service and Fish and Wildlife and Fish and Game databases. In our 2013 class, Why Do We Live Here?, students used the Alaska Shore Zone oblique photography to scan the beaches for little trickles of water coming out, gunhin. Soon afterward, though, we acquired LiDAR for our CBJ wetland survey, and with that, we can predict streams that you can hardly see on the ground. So here is the principal gunhin for the village of Anskatsu. A couple winters ago, I mapped and cataloged 90 of the most important village sites from Yakutat to Haida country. One of the fields in my database was aspect. Half of those villages faced southwest, and most of the rest faced west or south. Critical, of course, for gardening, but in cloudy Tlingit Ani, we're all sun bunnies. Finally, every village needed a nearby defensible retreat, preferably with sweeping views. Of the 5 primary selection factors, this one's obviously most negotiable if you're lucky enough to live in a time of peace. Here's bare earth with 2-foot contours for Aak'w, 44 feet above sea level. In the 1960s, KJ Metcalf produced a lovely film with Ed Kunz Sr., who stands below this bluff and tells its story. A corollary question to why do we live here is why do we move? I first wondered about this at Angoon. De Laguna interviewed elders whose memories went deep into the 1800s. The fortified village of Ketanjian was apparently evacuated in the smallpox epidemic of 1834. Between that home and arrival in Angoon, Isthmus Town, from my readings around 1865, there were 3 other remembered villages, each with its pros and cons. So each was occupied for about a decade. But aside from strife or catastrophe, why? Let's say we pull the house planks from our last winter village and set them up on this lovely raised beach at Windy Smokehouse. How long do you think that nice firewood will last? How long till the latrines get obnoxious? How long till we eat all the clams in easy walking distance, or the neighborhood deer? Of course, that's what canoes are for, but each year we range farther and farther. Think about those arrows radiating out from Anskatsu. These are questions about resilience, about carrying capacity and productivity cycles. Is Angoon the exception or the rule? About the only community with a timeline as deep as De Lagunas for Angoon is Old Kassan, Pretty Town. The story there is quite similar, beginning like Angoon's with the tragedy of 1835. For most of my career, I've tiptoed around the concept of resilience, but rarely addressed it, so I'm grateful to Colleen for this assignment. For me, one problem is that resilience is resistant to graphics, and I'm a pretty visual thinker. In 2009, I wrote a paper for Sitka Conservation Society ranking 10 forest types according to their suitability for long-term use. Best is fast-growing sheikh, red alder, salvation of the devastated valley bottoms. Worst is old-growth lach, western red cedar, which drives the layout of land selections and federal cutting units. We're losing this tree so fast that by the time our cartographers can detect it in LiDAR, it'll be too late to close the barn door. The outer inch of this cedar could have 50 annual rings. Southern Tan, Prince of Wales Island. Those paler yellow-green crowns with lots of droopy dead branches are ancient red cedars, some over 1,000 years old. This was a proposed log transfer facility, so they're probably gone now. My sister Laura Carstensen founded the Stanford Center on Longevity. So as an old tree guy, I think about parallels in the way our society treats old humans, and forests so old it couldn't be replaced in 50 human generations. My father had papers in publication when he died at 96, but at the checkout counter, people usually talked to me, assuming anyone so old and stooped was a poor bet for conversation. We don't treat old trees any better. I hope Laura can visit Tlingit Ani someday. She'd love to see how elders are revered in this country. For the third edition of Nature's Southeast Alaska, I added a sidebar called Harvesting Longevity. I don't use the word harvest in relation to wild species. It seems disrespectful. Turns out almost any taxa you choose, clams, fish, deer, trees, things all live longer and reproduce slower up here. Harvesting longevity is a problem for resilience. Australian naturalist Tim Flannery calls North America the eternal frontier, usually on the receiving end of invasions since the time of the dinosaurs. Frontiers attract future eaters, another Flannery term. I'm sure there are ecologists here, so I hesitate to bring up K versus R selection. This is something that Wilson and Arthur played with during their collaboration on island biogeography, but lost favor in the 1990s because many species don't pigeonhole neatly into K and R extremes. But K and R selection in broad outline is a tool for understanding and enabling resilience, especially here in this relatively intact archipelago with many ancient species and habitats. Perhaps less useful in the developed world where we've eaten all the K species already. R stands for rate of population growth, and K is from a German word for carrying capacity. R species, like mice and squirrels, have big litters frequently, chase them away, and die young. K species like bears, elephants, and us have few, well-spaced, long-lived young, investing heavily in their care. R species are ecological opportunists, while K species seek equilibrium. R species, such as deer, Kwaan, rely on predation to control their numbers. Otherwise, they overwhelm their habitat. K species are squabblers, spacing themselves out through sheer orneriness. In that sense, human clans are cay strategists, pretty turfy about their salmon streams. Over most of human history, clannishness was our path to stewardship. Not always dignified or generous, but the opposite of clannishness is overpopulation. We'd expect our species to predominate early in succession, with cay species mostly in older, more stable habitats. Obviously, these are just trends. But a resilient human culture takes its food and shelter from early, fast turnover habitats, on land or sea. It treats ancient communities as the Tlingit treat their elders. Wow. It just jumped right over my last 4 slides. Let's see if I can back up. Yeah. I think that's where I was. No, it's not. Okay. Give you a brief preview there. In this grid, red cedar doesn't entirely fit the cay criteria. It seeds abundantly, but it's exquisitely adapted to hold the ground while successive waves of hemlock grow up and fall around it. Cutting that tree or eating a rockfish as old as us should be something we do when we're young and foolish, like boys with BB guns. When we're old, we should recognize our peers. Markets that drive us to eradicate red cedar and rockfish are what the Resilience Alliance call perverse subsidies. Their website banner shows an even-aged, fast-growing conifer stand with almost zero deer food. Might not have been their point, but I'd call this a good candidate for the sawmill. Resilience has become quite the buzzword over the last decade or so. We used to use sustainability in a similar way, and I wonder why that's changed. To me, resilience implies scrappy response to catastrophe or great hardship, while sustainability suggests more control, prevention as opposed to cure. Does that remind you of R versus K selection? Have we given up on equilibrium? Resilience has 3 pieces. One piece is community. You can't get there alone. Define community however broadly you like, but remember the lessons of Kwaan. The second is education. A resilient person or society never stops learning. And the most important thing to learn is our place, Tlingit Ani. The third piece is health. It's not fashionable to say this anymore, but health is usually the opposite of wealth. Wealth is a warped standard for advanced civilization. We can't take it with us. We need to slim down. Everyone here knows there's a hard climb ahead. The trail runner strategy is divesting. Resilience isn't rocket science. It's more about morality. Gary Snyder saw it coming back in 1975. You've all had plenty of time to read this already, but in the next century or the one beyond that, they say, are valley pastures. We can meet there in peace if we make it. To climb these coming crests, one word to you, you and your children. Stay together, learn the flowers, go light. Community, education, health. Goodness, Chish. Goodness, Chish. Especially grateful for that, given all the technical difficulties. Do we have time for questions? Yes. Can we have a mic over here?
It's not. Hold on. It's on. Here it comes.
Sheesh. Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. But I heard you mention Goose-Ache, and I was wondering, I missed what you said about that, because Goose-Ache is in Dry Bay.
Is in,
Dry Bay?
yes.
Yeah.
My analogy there, yeah, the question was about what's sometimes referred to as the lost village of Goose-Ache up in Dry Bay, south of Yakutat. And a really wonderful thing happened there over the course of several decades. Bert Adams and a bunch of folks from Yakutat had been searching for this village, but lacked the archaeological skills to find it, and they'd probably walked right over it several times, and finally hooked up with archaeologists. My friend Wayne Howell is part of that, and it ended up just being an incredible experience for the community of Yakutat, leading to hundreds of people coming in and helicoptering in latrines for these big gatherings and just celebrating the recovery of this village that was known well in oral history, but was finally relocated on the ground. And the reason I brought that up is I think that what could potentially happen at Satahine or any of the other little-known Aak'w and Taku Kwaan villages could have a similar effect for our community. You have a comment on that?
Satahine, I think maybe I read this in one of your papers. Did you say Satahine, they took their name from there? From
Satahine,
Admiralty Cove?
they being
Or am I-
the Satine D.
Yeah,
There is a
yeah.
clan that did take their name from that. Satahine means behind the seal water, and they were the people of the seal.
And they're Taku Kwaan?
Originally, apparently, Aak'w, but yes, ending up in Taku. That's what I've read. I think probably
Yeah.
Tom knows more about that.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a couple questions about trying to discover these villages and the technology being used for discovering some of these. Do you expect there to be more use of LiDAR to try to locate more village sites and even fish camp sites?
Yes.
Number one. And number two, given that your slide that showed a time when the water was lower, is there any similar technology to use for underwater exploration to try to locate village sites that are now flooded? I know that they found one site down in Aak'w so far in a bay where it was about 40 feet underwater. So I'm just curious if this technology, does it help to the point where you can actually go out and walk the site and actually locate things like remnants of house posts and stuff? Thank you.
LiDAR is not much help underwater. I think the sites that have been found underwater, I have heard of one where a blade was brought up in a crab pot, but LiDAR ends at the waterline. But it's every year it just bumps up to a new level. The example I showed you is 1 meter resolution, and we can already do 10 times better than that. So imagine the view of the house pads at Anshkaltsu with order of magnitude better resolution. And so yes, I think it's going to become very common for archaeologists to use that. Some already are. Kathy and I climbed up to 300 feet out the road with Rachel Myron from the Juneau Ranger District, I think last year, looking at an ancient tombolo spit. A tombolo is like there's an island and then a little spit connecting it. And those are really prime locations because you can pull up your canoe, or in those days would have been a skin boat, on either side depending on the weather conditions. So just we knew we could just strip the forest and all the underbrush away and see the bare land exactly as it would have been 12,000 years ago. And climbed up and spent a while digging, didn't find anything, but that's ultimately going to yield a lot of exciting discoveries.
Yeah, hi. I recently went to a lecture at the Solov building, speaking of migrations, and and having been to the volcano country that's to the, to the east of us, I'm interested in your, and knowing about the caves that are in, I think, Prince of Wales, what they were discovered. I'm curious on your opinions or facts that you may have gathered on migrations or on the origins of the people who live here.
Yeah, that was the, I unfortunately was preparing for this and didn't get to attend that. Was that the talk by the geneticist about, no?
She was not a geneticist.
Something different, I guess. It's a huge subject, the really ancient sites, the on-your-knees caveman. There's a paper just out recently, within the last year, on the genetics of that person and other people not quite that old down in British Columbia. I'm really fascinated about genetics. My father put together the story of our family on his side and my mother's side going back 10,000 years or more to the Fertile Crescent. With traditional library-based genealogy, we can go back a few hundred, maybe 1,000 years on one or two lines. But anyone can now know a lot about their father's 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 father through Y chromosome and their mother's 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 mother through mtDNA. And that is the story of Tlingit clans. That's the Tlingit clan structure. So mtDNA is the ultimate tool for the exploration of matrilineal cultures. And I think the only thing holding us back right now is the low sample size. As more and more people submit genetic samples, we're gonna, I think in 10 years, we're gonna know a great deal about the movements of clans and in and out of this country. I'm sorry, I can't. No what? No, I can't evaluate it. This stuff is, this is rocket science. And very few people are really qualified to understand what's going on in these papers. So for now, we're kind of trusting the folks that are the people, the technicians that can do the genetic work and the people that know something about history of the Northwest Coast.
Thank you, Richard. Very nice presentation. I don't know much more about Young Bay, but I did, when I did a study of Aak'w, which is the area just on the other side of Aak'w, there was a Wishkitan elder named Charles Johnson who I had the opportunity to interview with his daughter. This was in 1997, who was very old then, and he talked about that village in Admiralty Cove. And because I myself am getting old now, I can't remember all that he said, but it's in the report on Aak'w. But I think both he and Philip Joseph were consistent in that that's where people settled first before moving into first Fairhaven, what they call Fairhaven, and then over to Anch'l Tsu. So I think that's quite consistent. So I think it's very supportive of that being probably a larger village and an original settlement.
If you imagine what the country was like here when they arrived in the peak of the Little Ice Age, the mainland would not have been too appealing.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you a question, though, about well, adaptation and resilience. I think another distinction that's made is that resilience tends to be quite conservative, while adaptation embraces change, if not transformation of some kind, so they're often opposed. But I wonder about the Tlingit phenomenon, and now I'm an anthropologist asking a naturalist a question about anthropology, but about becoming multi-local, which is something that clans did. I mean, that itself seems to be resilience and adaptation at the same time.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Oh. Are you referring to post-contact times?
I would say post-flood times. One of the things that it becomes remarkable is that clans became multi-local, and so they maintained a relationship and identity with each other while being in different places, which is, if you think about it, a resilient strategy, but also a transformative one in terms of social organization in a very, very dynamic region like Southeast Alaska.
Like, for example, clans that are shared between interior and out in the archipelago. Yeah. And these it's so cool to read the stories about how that happened, those movements, and to hope that with genetic sampling and learning more about our past through that window, I think in 10 years, at the rate things are advancing now, Daklawedi girl in Angoon could be sitting looking at a tablet with her grandmother, just tracing their family back up the Stikine where their stories say they came from, and imagining what that country was like, and starting to get a better sense of how all of those things relate to glacial advance and retreat.
Thank you, Richard. I find it very interesting to hear you use the traditional names for the different locations around our community. And I'm wondering what's going on with getting these traditional names actually more well known to everybody who lives here in Juneau.
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. Place names are very important to me. When Tom Thornton's book that he did with Harold Martin, that it's called Our Grandparents' Names on the Land, when that came out in 2013, it was transformative for me. And I decided at that point, it took a little while to ease into it, but from now on, if I have the name, I'll use it in all of my cartography and writing. And in my speaking too, however horrible my pronunciations are, I think it's better to try and garble it than not to try at all. I was at a presentation that the young man Will Geiger gave about 6 months ago here on campus. That it was attended by 30 or 40 people who are all deeply immersed in this movement to get our names back. And sitting there and listening to him, a fluent speaker, I was finally confident that 20 years from now, a kid who's born today could be using the original names for our landscape and be kind of puzzled at why we would call the valley after the name of a man who might not even have seen it. So I refer to those as important white guy names. And my convention is to always use the Tlingit name first, followed by the translation in italic, and the important white guy name in parentheses.
Like glacier.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Ganashish, Richard, thank you so much for your sharing this evening. My question for you is, knowing the wide range of youth that you've had the opportunity to work with, in particular your work with Goldbelt and Sealaska, if you could speak to their experiences in response to your information and sharing in context to resilience.
Yeah. Is Kate Cruz here? She was going to try and make it. Oh, there she is. Would you answer that? You could do so much better job of answering that question.
Thank you, and very honored to have ever gotten the opportunity to work with Richard, never mind the continuing partnership. I work for Goldbelt Heritage Foundation and Discovery Southeast now, so Richard and I co-taught the Why Do We Live Here class, and we had about 17 kids, I say kids, I shouldn't, 9th through 12th grade high school students from all 3 high schoolers in that class. And they responded incredibly well to Richard. He became the backbone of our class. He became the glue that tied everything together. And as a result, 85% of them went on to get jobs and internships in the natural sciences. And they were students from all different backgrounds. It was a class open to Alaska Native and non-Native students. And so I just think that exposure to that kind of rigorous science, exposure to the kind of applied science and math that Richard brought to the class was so meaningful. And then, of course, with the strong connections to culture and heritage and language, it all just comes together really beautifully. So that's the model we're moving forward with in all of our future classes, and hoping to get Richard tied into even more students. So not enough nice things to say. I could go on and on. Thank you.
Gracias. Yeah, if anyone wants to do Why Do We Live Here again, I'm there. I'm all over that.
Well, I certainly hope that you continue to present this to the children of this community. One of the things that was really helpful to learning the right name of our junior high school, which is named after the creek that has the white guy name of Gold Creek, was to write a song. And John Palms did us all a great favor, because we all know how to say Zantakahini now. And I would hope that we could do something similar in other ways, maybe with music, maybe with art, to keep reinforcing these names in the community until we all know that we really live in Zantakahini, and maybe we can change the name of our capital city to Zantakahini.
All over that, too.
If they can do it in Barrow, we can do it here. Utqiagvik, excuse me.
To me, the 3 most problematic important white guys are Juneau, Mendenhall, and Gastineau. And in fact, Jim Garrity tells me we don't even know the origin of the name Gastineau Channel. Some say it was some Canadian trapper, and some say it was a steamship. When we use a name for a place that we have no clue where it comes from, our brain just turns off. And when we use the Tlingit name, every time we say it, we have a bond with the story that's under that name.
Richard, thank you not only for this evening's presentation, but for your decades of preparation for it. You have become, as Wes Jackson said at the Land Institute, becoming native to this place. Not native in the sense of the first people here, but you were the troglodyte of the Boy Scout camp for many years, so you put in your time to be qualified to do this. A question, what will resilience mean in the future? Given, among other things, continued isostatic rebounds, our land is rising faster than sea level is rising, so the Lord giveth, but the Lord will taketh away as the sea level rise increases. What do you think resilience will mean in the future context here?
Whoa, that's a pretty huge question. I don't even know where to start. I have to say I was scared reading that Gary Snyder poem about the coming Chris. Yeah, that it's going to be hard. And resilience, I'm so glad to have had a chance to spend a couple of weeks thinking about it, because That's all I can say. Sounds like that's it. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Wow.
Before we adjourn, we have a gift for Richard from the university. So here you go.
Oh,
Gonna sheesh.
goodness, geez. Mr. Thornton? Wow. Thank you very much.